Hello and welcome to DeHavilland's latest live stream. This time we're looking at the EU side of what we do, and in particular the European Green Deal. With me to discuss that is Seb Dance. Hi Seb, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Seb was MEP representing London for the Labour Party between 2014 and the UK's departure from the EU. He sat on the DiVi, Agri and E-Trade committees and is perhaps best known for his work on ENVI, where he was vice chair, and he's now a senior advisor at Signum. So thanks for joining us, Seb. As I said at the outset, we're mostly looking at the European Green Deal. But just before we turn to that, I wanted to hear about your experiences sat on the Environment, Public Health and Food Safety Committee, because it's such a broad committee and it almost feels sometimes like two or three remits shoved into one. How does that affect MEPs working on the committee with such a number of policy areas?
Well, I'm biased, so I will say it's the most exciting committee, obviously, in the European Parliament. If for no other reason than the fact that it deals with the vast majority of legislative proposals that come from the Commission. So if you think about the areas that the ENVI Committee covers, it is obviously environmental legislation, but it's also the range of public health legislation that we have that pertains to the single market, to customer and consumer protection in terms of the food we eat and the stuff we drink. So it has a huge remit in terms of the EU's actual competencies. You might think that the Foreign Affairs Committee might be slightly sexier, perhaps, in terms of the issues it deals with, but actually the ENVI Committee is where the actual legislation takes place. So you have to have a very strong grasp of what it is you're working on, and you have to have a broad range of interests. But the great thing about the committee is, of course, it's comprised of people who are experts in their field from all over Europe, and it's very easy to carve out a particular niche within that committee that you might want to spearhead, and I think that's probably what the majority of members end up doing.
But we would never accuse you of being less sexy than someone from AFET, Seb. And how does that affect sort of your engagement with stakeholders as an MEP? Is it really important that people are coming and, be they charities or industry, they're aware of what your specific areas of interest are?
Oh, absolutely. I come at this with a particular UK perspective, and one of the most frustrating things, I think, when it came to the UK was that often people would only realise at the very last minute that there was some sort of involvement with the European Parliament and they better contact their MEP and find out what was going on, by which time, of course, many of the positions and issues had already been decided. I mean, there was really a very short window in between appointment of rapporteur and shadow rapporteurs and the first round of negotiations. Really, that's the point at which people need to be getting involved. And the UK was not great at that compared to other countries, but it was quite a common thing, I think, for other colleagues as well, to have people engaging at a slightly too late stage of this. But yeah, it's very important that everybody gets involved. It's very important as a member of the European Parliament that you seek that engagement as well. And it's also important to realise that you're never going to agree on everything, of course, but actually raising problems and considerations at a very early stage is a crucial part of the process. And lobbying has a bad name, but actually, if you think about it in another term, we're talking about civil society and engaging in the political process. And without that engagement, you will end up with interest being overlooked or forgotten about, and it's much harder to then later insert a clarification or an amendment than it is to get the ethos right at the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's turn to the European Green Deal. So it's got these three headline stated aims, which is net zero by 2050, it's economic growth decoupled from resource use, and ensuring that no person or no place is left behind. So the Commission's really built, I think von der Leyen described it as Europe's new growth strategy, and there's going to be a huge amount of money involved as well. So be that, we imagine a lot of money from the new MFF, and we might come later on to talk about the COVID recovery package as well, but also private finance. So is this really as big as it looks like? And maybe you could touch a little bit on how you think this differs from previous green initiatives from the EU.
Well, I think it is as big as it seems. We have to remember that this Commission came in with a very different ethos to the previous Commission. Of course, the previous Commission was kind of really all about tightening the belt, kind of extending austerity policies across the board to try and deal with the aftermath of effectively the 2008 crisis. That's really what the Juncker Commission was all about. The new Commission has a completely different ethos. It came in with the idea of actually spending a large amount of money in order to completely reconfigure the European economy. And it's a very broad, big ambition. And of course, at the beginning of this process, you had the kind of usual political splits. I'd say that a consensus is emerging towards the need for something of this magnitude. That was already there, but I think actually COVID has accelerated that. And never waste a good crisis, you could say. And I think that the Commission has done exactly that in this instance, and seen that there is an emerging consensus for large amounts of public money now to get us through this crisis, to deal with the aftermath, the economic and social aftermath of what will happen in the coming months and years. And to use this opportunity to say, well, hang on a minute, why not use this money to reconfigure Europe's economy and to make it sustainable? That's where the future is. There's no future for investors. There's no future for jobs. There's no future for communities in industries that continue to deplete the world of its natural resources, to continue to pollute the air and contribute to climate change. So that's the kind of double side of this. Now, obviously, the political divisions that were there at the beginning are still there. You still have people who are reticent about spending large amounts of public money, understandably, politically as well as many other reasons. But I think this is the opportunity in terms of finding that broad consensus. And I think that the divisions will not be over whether or not this is needed. I don't think they'll even be over whether or not this should be a big package of the type that we've seen proposed already. I think the divisions will come in the detail, and they'll come over things like the split between how basically countries should pay back some of this, about how effective things like the Just Transition Fund should be, and also, of course, the perennial arguments about what will constitute sustainability and what won't constitute sustainability, because those taxonomy discussions, they might be over for the current phase, but they will continue.
Yeah, and you sort of touched there on some of the opportunities. Are there particular sectors or countries that you think seek to benefit from this? And maybe also, whenever there's big change in the economy or in technology, there are risks as well. What risks do you see?
Oh, yeah. I mean, in terms of the sectors, I mean, there's obvious, sectors that deal specifically with sustainable energy production and sustainable means of mobilization. So anyone who's kind of basically investing in solar, wind, in battery technology. If you look, for instance, at the measures that are being taken in individual member states, in Germany, there could have been a kind of traditional bailout for the car industry, but what we've seen instead is incentivization for the production and research of electric vehicles and more efficient means of electric transmission for vehicles. So that's clearly where a lot of the future lies. I mean, but the dangers are obvious. So we talk a lot about the communities left behind. If you look at countries like Poland, for example, where there is a high degree of dependency on coal for the production of energy, it's got two aspects really. One, there's coal, and it's readily available. Although, to be fair, Poland imports still most of its coal. It doesn't actually produce the majority of the coal it uses. And the second aspect, of course, is energy security, which is a big issue in countries like Poland that don't want to be dependent on other countries. Now, you can't just switch that off and say, well, at some point we'll come up with alternatives and we'll get there, because look at the kilowatt hour to dollar put in for solar. It's really good now. Yeah, fine, great. But unless you front load that, put the resources and the infrastructure in now, that transition is going to take very much longer, and you're going to get a lot of social problems, resulting from the sudden and immediate closure of industrial areas. You don't have to look very far to see the precedent for that. And that's really where the just transition comes in. It's where the front loading of a lot of this investment comes in as well. And it's going to take a lot to change hearts and minds. It's going to take a lot to shift the way in which we operate. But we don't really have a choice. I mean, the climate crisis is kind of perhaps not front and center of the front pages at the moment because of COVID, but it's still there. We are still enduring a transition in weather patterns that is unforeseen, unpredictable, and it will have real consequences every single year in different parts of the world. It will mean different things at different times, and it's that unpredictability that is very scary indeed. So we have to deal with it, and we have to deal with it now.
I think it's really interesting that you touched there on the social aspect of this, because it's been fascinating to me to see that when MEPs, particularly from Eastern Europe, have been talking about, cohesion policy and what that looks like in a green context, there's been so much focus on the social and not just on the economic, actually. So because this is such a, it's so broad and it's going to touch on economic factors and obviously environmental factors and agriculture and all these sorts of things, how does that affect the way in which an organisation might seek to feed into these discussions that we're talking about here? Because, it's being driven by the Commission, but it's also going to have a number of committees that are focused on it. The Council clearly is going to have its say. Where are the obvious touch points for organisations?
Well, I mean, you've got your kind of standard ways of approaching in terms of, you go and talk to Commission officials, you can go and talk to members of your Parliament, all the rest of it. That's not going to change. And the institutional ways in which the decisions are reached are not going to change anytime soon, although there are arguments for why they should, but we're not going to get treaty change anytime soon. So
we'll do a different video with you on that.
Yeah, but I could. That'll be quite a long video, I think. But yeah, so in that sense, the kind of normal ways of doing things still apply. But I think there's an awful lot that could and should be done in talking to providers on the ground, and I mean local authorities and cities, in terms of the impact that many of these initiatives will have directly. So we talk about the overall amount of money that will be available. We talk about the commitments that different member states will make. We even drill down into the different sectors that will be affected, but we don't often talk about how will a particular city council actually ensure that its construction fleet, for example, is transformed and that they procure equipment that complies with certain regulations and so on and so forth. Now, some of that is already there legislatively, but actually what the Green Deal will mean is that there will be funds available to try and speed that process up. Now, actually identifying what they are and liaising with local authorities and working with them, I think, is a crucial aspect of policy that really is overlooked when you look at the EU in general. I think there has to be a much better way of linking the overall ambitions of the member states and the Commission and the Parliament and drilling that down to at a local level. So I think that needs to change. And in terms of, there are ways in which bridging technology can be brought in as a way to sort of demonstrate a commitment on a pathway to sustainability. But I think what has happened hitherto is that a lot of people have tried to defend vested interests far too vociferously and disguise it as a bridging technology and say, well, we'll deal with this in 50 or even 70 years' time. That's not going to fly anymore. We have to be realistic about the timeframes here and the net zero. We need action now. We need immediate action. Bridging technologies is something that is instinctively understood and is necessary. I mean, we're not going to suddenly switch everything now. However, we need to be realistic about what those timeframes mean, and that means we need to think again about investment cycles, and that is very hard for people to do because we have investment cycles that last 35, 40 years. It's not going to work this time around because things will be very, very different in 15 years' time, let alone 35 years' time. And I think that requires a very serious and deep conversation with all sorts of actors, and it's not something I can solve on this call, I'm afraid.
That's quite all right. I want to move on a little bit to the politics, which you have touched on already, but looking at things like the Just Transition Fund and comparing, and indeed actually the COVID recovery package, which is under discussion at the moment, that looks like such a different space with such different mood music to a lot of the discussions going on 10 years ago about recovery from the financial crash. That's my view as an observer, but with your understanding of Brussels, is that how it feels there as well, that the political dynamics are quite different here?
Well, we started off with a lot of skepticism about the Just Transition Fund, and not just from kind of usual political areas in the Parliament, but from the Commission and Commission officials, it was seen very much as, actually, do you know what? I don't think I'm wrong in saying I think that it was the British Labour MEPs who really started this conversation. At least I like to think it is. Some time ago, actually. And, we identified basically what the risks were. I think the reason that it's sprung to the fore now is part of the package is not just down to the wonderful actions of my colleagues and my political colleagues, former political colleagues in the S&D, great though they were, and crucial as they were. I think actually what's happened is that there has been a gradual realization of the scale of this. And I think perhaps when the Just Transition Fund was first mooted, I think, to be honest, people were still thinking that this whole project was about tinkering around the edges and maybe shaving a bit off here and helping a particular sector, cut 20% of its carbon emissions by 2040 or whatever, and that would be the end of it. And I think what's changed is it's the realization that, hang on, that's simply not going to cut it. We are going to have to move very quickly, and we're going to have to move very radically. And I think that has then focused minds, into looking at what those societal consequences will be. And that's why the Just Transition Fund is now not just a theoretical discussion, but something with numbers behind it and with real targets. And hopefully, and obviously it depends what happens going forward, a really intelligent conversation about how and where those funds are divided and distributed. And that's completely different to, I don't know, maybe even 2 years ago. I think the conversation on the Just Transition Fund was almost about saying, yeah, sure, we'll make sure we do something. After the deed is done, we'll make sure that a bit of money goes to coal mining areas or whatever. Well, that's now changed, and well, that's a good thing. But I think it's a reflection of the increasing realization of the seriousness of this.
What do you think the sticking points might be, or some of the challenges? I mean, looking in my notes at some of your experience, you were sort of shadow rapporteur on the National Emissions Ceiling Directive, and you did, rapporteur work on the Sustainable Development Goals, and then more on the industry side, you were part of the group looking at Dieselgate as well. So you've got lots of experience on controversial files, I suppose, and ones where there are differences of opinion. Do you think there are some sticking points or some obstacles down the road on this one?
Since the European Coal and Steel Community was founded, there have been some constant truths that have always stood up. One is that the Germans will always protect the car industry, right? and ensure that all of the bits of legislation, whether it be on the environment or whatever standards are decided at community level, that ultimately it is the domestic industry as it is that should be protected. And that totem has fallen now with the realization from the German federal government that actually the shift onto sustainability is now required. And if Germany is to maintain its role as a leading car manufacturer, then that shift has to take place. End of. Now, when we were doing the Dieselgate scandal, I think it was 2015 when that committee of inquiry was first convened. We were dealing with the effects of policy effectively from the previous 10 years, so maybe 2005 to 2015, so not very long ago, and yet the level of collusion is a very strong word, and it means different things to different people. We have to understand why these systems were set up. It was necessary to get agreement actually between manufacturers and regulators. You can't regulate without the input of the manufacturers. So it's not the fault of, no one designed this system deliberately to cheat. The problem was that the structures were such that there was so much cross-fertilization, if you like, of ideas between the regulators and the manufacturers that it ended up not being meaningless, but it certainly ended up being, nothing like as effective as it should have been. Flexible technical committees basically making decisions that could completely, rendered the political decisions on emission limits basically meaningless. And already now, not only was it the Committee of Inquiry that shone a light onto this, the public scandal about Dieselgate, the fact that there's a lack of compensation for European consumers, all of that contributed, of course, but the zeitgeist has completely changed now. So I think, the sticking points going forward will be very, very different to the ones we've had in the past. One area that has been present since 1953, and I don't see it changing anytime soon, and this is, I think, a big battle to come, is agriculture. And we tend to think agriculture doesn't have anything to do with this, or we know 40% of the union's budget spent on this. It's mad, but what can you do? Well, actually, there's a huge amount you can do, because agriculture is a key emitter. And there are actually some really simple things that we can do, but we need to be able to provide money to farmers in order to completely transform the way in which they do things. So that's one area that will be a huge sticking point, because the interest close. People tend to perceive this as an attack on rural communities, and it's not. It really isn't. But we have to, every single sector has to move forward with this. You can't simply rely on others. And I'm sorry, I know this is a very long answer, but the last kind of sticking point, the major sticking point that I think will be ever present, is, I'm afraid, the member states. And I sound like a federalist here. Perhaps that's what I am. The fundamental issue is always that when the Parliament and the Commission want really ambitious targets on things, it's the member states that end up diluting them. And that, again, this is where I think the cities and regions can play a huge part in saying, actually, do you know what? We're ready to play our role. We're ready to transform the way in which we do things. We want to work with our national governments and with the European Union to do that. And I hope that, because the zeitgeist has changed in so many ways in specific sectors, that maybe, just maybe, there might be a change in mindset at council level.
And of course, I think the other thing people forget, that the monitoring and the implementation of this so often falls upon local or regional governments as well. So that relationship is enormously important there too. It would be remiss of us not to talk about COVID, partly because it's dominating all of our thoughts at the moment, but also because the recovery package that's there is looking like it might be enmeshed with the green goals of the Commission. So how do you think the pandemic and specifically the economic mitigations might end up feeding into this? It's such a live debate, but where do you see this going?
It was a Czech Prime Minister, I think, and I apologize if it wasn't, and I'm defaming him, but I think it was the Czech Prime Minister who said, when COVID first hit, that you had to throw out the Green Deal. We didn't have time or money to deal with this now. That this was so serious that we had to concentrate on the pandemic and not, green crap, to paraphrase someone else.
The translation from the Czech.
But no, it's actually David Cameron. That's a quote from David Cameron. But anyway, at the time, and this, it was casting our minds back, or when was this, February or March? At the time, there was this sort of, oh my goodness, is this going to start a cascade of opposition? And actually, thank goodness, fellow 26 other leaders, heads of government, didn't join in that call. And actually that gave the Commission a lot of momentum, I think, to actually push ahead. We've got to remember, this is the flagship policy for the Commission. Of course, events, dear boy, events kind of blow things out of the water constantly. Wouldn't it be nice if the universe ran to a spreadsheet, but it doesn't. But ultimately, your flagship policy is the thing that you have committed to bring in during your 5-year term. And it's not just something that has implications for those 5 years. Of course, it's about transforming the economy for the next 50, 100 years. And if you get this wrong now, people will look back in 30 years' time and go, do you remember that opportunity which we wasted? And do you remember the people who wasted it? So all of that has kind of built up a head of steam, plus the new, I think, consensus on the need for public money. Actually, it's kind of the perfect storm, if you like, for the Green Deal, in a way that I think, even just maybe 10 or 12 weeks ago, it seemed pretty kind of, iffy as to whether or not the scale of this and the speed of this could be achieved. But there are divisions, of course, obviously, within the Commission itself. And I think, you particularly with the Transport Commissioner, previous chair of the ENVI Committee, I should say, there's been quite a bit of pushback and calls for the Commission really to concentrate and emphasize the protection of existing business rather than transformation to sustainability. And I think what's happened, classic EU style, and I'm a huge advocate for this, because I think as policy setting, it works. There has been a compromise, and I think the compromise has effectively been, we'll deal with the immediate aftermath of this by allowing breaches of state aid rule for companies to protect existing jobs, as in existing workforces, existing work practices. You can effectively spend what you need to spend. We will waive the state aid rules in order to protect that. However, the recovery is now tied to the Green Deal. And I think that is a classic compromise. I think it's probably the most sensible, and it's the right thing to do, quite frankly. No one should lose their jobs because of events out of their control that, if we can do something about it. However, the injection of public money does now need a transformation in the economy. So let's hope that that truce, if you like, within the Commission holds, and that the compromise holds, and that the ethos of that compromise filters down into the decisions that are made in Council and Parliament. I think probably that consensus is achievable this time round. Let's hope so. I'm certainly an optimist on this front anyway.
And does that mean that it's very important that civil society and industry is consistent in its messaging and setting out its stall coherently regarding both recovery from COVID and also, what's going to come in the MFF next year and as part of that, the European Green Deal?
Yes, I mean, you're not going to get anywhere, I don't think, by saying, effectively, look, we can't deal with this now, we need to carry on as normal, and then we'll maybe think about it. Everything has to be tied to the transformation. So it's right and proper, obviously, to make the case for reform even to protect existing jobs and ensure that companies don't go under and all the rest of it. That is entirely proper and correct. But what would be incorrect is then to say, but we need this support to maybe carry on. We won't change the way in which things are done, and we will then argue against initiatives of the Green Deal as and when they come up. That would be a counterproductive way to run, I think. And you will always find allies opposed to the Green Deal. I mean, there's plenty of people in the Parliament who will speak out against it. But do you really want these guys fighting your corner, because they are on the losing side of this battle? And they're becoming more and more fringe. There are divisions, of course, within each political grouping. I'm not claiming that everybody is singing from the same hymn sheet on this. However, those divisions, again, the consensus that we're finding more broadly is the same direction of movement within each political group. Even within the EPP, in fact, especially within the EPP, because the Green Deal has won a lot of converts in a lot of places, and that needs to be taken on board by everybody.
Wonderful. Seb, thank you so much. I think we're going to have to catch up next year and see where this has all gone. But we've covered a huge amount there in the time, and we really appreciate you joining us today.
So thank you very much.
And thank you to everyone for watching.